So I start off explaining the hole-in-the-wall theory to the kids, and basically what I tell them is that there was this guy many, many years ago, and he had this brilliant idea that kids could learn by themselves. And so what they did was they dropped this kiosk with a computer. It was somewhere in India, and they just dropped it into this, very poor area and did research to see what would happen. And what they found out was that kids, and not just kids, but adults too, they would gather in groups of 3 or 4, and what they thought would happen is that they would just watch videos and search celebrities and that kind of stuff. But what they were actually doing was teaching themselves. They were learning languages, they were learning software, they were being creative. And what they found, so they say, was that people worked best in groups of 3 or 4. So then I tell the kids, I'm like, when you hear small group activity, usually it's one person doing all the work and everybody else copying. That's not how this is going to be. We're going to test this hole-in-the-wall theory, and everybody participates. They bought into this, and it was awesome. And as you can see by some of the pictures and the video in this little explanation, the kids were really good, and they did a great job. And so from there on, we called it our hole-in-the-wall activity groups, or whatever we called it back then. So from there, that's when I introduced what we were going to do with this activity. And in the first picture, you can see the type of post-it paper that I was talking about in the explanation. As you can see on this paper, the pre-marked black lines, those black lines were part of the instructions. When I assigned each group a particular cell part, they were instructed to write above the black line. Below the black line was for a different purpose, which I'll get to in just a second. Day 1 was straight research within the group. No big paper, no markers, no nothing. Each group was assigned a particular cell part. They were instructed to research and find all the information that they could for their cell part, write it down, share with their group, share all the information. Day 2 is where we started with the big paper. Day 2 started with a big paper. Each group wrote their information about their cell part on the big post-it paper above the black line, and then they were instructed to hang their post-it on the wall underneath the sign that represented their cell part. Then I instructed the kids to get out a sheet of notebook paper and divide it into 8 sections, because that's how many cell parts there were. 8 sections. Label each section with one of the cell parts that was hanging on the wall. Once everybody was ready, I instructed them that the first round would be to, as a group, as a team, go to each post-it paper, write down the information that was there, and if they knew something about the cell part that wasn't on the paper, based on their research, they could write it underneath the black line so that we could distinguish what was the original information and then the additional information. At the same time, I was walking around the room and I was adding information below the black line. Once everybody got round 1 finished, I had them sit back down, take a minute to look at their notes, organize their thoughts, and then they had one last round 2, which they could do on their own. They didn't have to do it as a group, and they were instructed to go back to each post-it paper, double check the information, because they may have moved on from a post-it after somebody added some information under the black line. So they got one last round around the room to pick up any information that they might have missed. I love this hole-in-the-wall as an intro activity for plant and animal cells, because it kind of gets them familiar with the terminology and maybe some of the functions of the cell parts, so that going into later discussions and quote lectures, notes, whatever, they're kind of familiar with what's going on, and it makes the discussions a little bit easier.